We start with new developments in the case of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, whose body was found in the front trunk of singer David's impounded Tesla in September.
David was officially identified as a suspect in the teen's death this week, and now a source that's close to the case says detectives have identified a second suspect. Lindsay Pena, live in our news center with the latest on that. Lindsay?
Rick and Karine, this is the second major development in this case this week. Back on Tuesday, a source was able to confirm to KTLA that singer David is being named as a suspect, as you mentioned. The body of the Lake Elsinore teen was found September 8th in the front trunk of David's Tesla, impounded at a Hollywood tow yard. David was on tour at the time, but police now believe Hernandez was killed last spring. The medical examiner reported she had been dead for an extended period of time. Just yesterday, the case was updated in the medical examiner's website. The cause of death had been listed as deferred for weeks, but now there is no information listed, which means there could be a security hold on the case.
The Los Angeles medical examiner had Celeste Rivas Hernandez's case listed on their website. Cause of death, deferred. Then one day, all that information disappeared. Every field went blank. Why? Because the LAPD requested a court order to place a security hold on the case, which means they know something. They've got evidence they don't want getting out. Evidence that connects singer David, whose Tesla the 14-year-old's body was found in, to her death. Evidence about a second suspect who may have helped dispose of the body. Evidence about a freezer, dismemberment, and a midnight trip to Santa Barbara. And now, nobody's talking. Not the LAPD, not the ME, not David's lawyers, but the silence? That's the loudest part of this whole story. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 14 years old, born and raised in Lake Elsinore, California. A teenager with her whole life ahead of her. The kind of girl who should have been worrying about homework and high school drama, not ending up in a criminal investigation that would make national headlines. But somewhere along the way, Celeste's life intersected with singer David. And we need to be clear about something. The LAPD has not publicly confirmed the nature of the relationship between Celeste and David. They haven't said she was his girlfriend, haven't said they were dating, haven't given us those details. But there have been reports, unconfirmed reports, alleged images and videos of them together, whispers about a connection that shouldn't have existed between a grown man and a 14-year-old girl. David was a singer, had a following, had a career, was touring, performing, living the kind of life that takes you away from home for weeks at a time. And somehow, during all of that, Celeste ended up in his orbit. Now, here's what we do know for certain. In April 2024, Celeste was reported missing. Her family filed a report, said they hadn't seen her, didn't know where she was, didn't know if she was safe, and for months there was no sign of her, no updates, no sightings, nothing. Then September 8th, 2025 happened. A Tesla was parked on Bluebird Avenue in Hollywood, residential street, nothing fancy. The car had been sitting there for a while. Long enough that it got ticketed, long enough that eventually it got towed. The car ended up at a Hollywood tow yard waiting to be processed. And that's when a housekeeper walked up to inventory the vehicle. She opened the trunk. Teslas have a front trunk called a frunk, and what she saw made her scream, made her run, made her call for help immediately. Celeste Rivas Hernandez's body was inside, 14 years old. Wrapped up, covered with blankets and life jackets. And the condition of the body? Let me tell you something. It was bad. Real bad. The body had been decapitated. The limbs had been severed, cut into pieces. The torso was intact, but mutilated. And here's the part that made investigators' blood run cold. The body was still, partially frozen. Even after sitting in that car for days, even after baking under the sun in a Hollywood tow yard, the body parts were still cold to the touch, still had frost burns, still showed signs of having been kept in a freezer for an extended period of time. The car was registered to David. the singer who was on tour at the time. The singer who'd been performing in front of crowds while a 14-year-old girl's body was decomposing in his vehicle. The LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division took over the case. And when you're dealing with a body in that condition, dismembered, frozen, hidden in a celebrity's car, you know you're looking at something calculated, something planned, something that took time and effort and help. Because here's the thing about dismembering a body. It's not easy. It's brutal, exhausting work, takes strength, takes tools. Takes somebody who's either done it before or who's desperate enough to figure it out. And cutting up a 14-year-old girl, that's a level of evil most people can't even imagine. But it gets worse. The fact that the body was frozen, that tells investigators this wasn't a panicked cover-up. This wasn't somebody killing Celeste and immediately trying to dispose of the body. This was somebody who killed her, then kept her body somewhere in a freezer for months, preserved her, hid her, and then, for reasons investigators are still trying to understand, moved her body to Los Angeles and left it in a car where it would eventually be found. Make it make sense. Why would you go through all that trouble to hide a body for months just to leave it somewhere it's going to get discovered? The LAPD started pulling everything they could: phone records, social media data, Tesla's internal tracking system. Because Teslas? They record everything. Every place the car goes, every time it's unlocked, every time somebody accesses the trunk. All of that data is stored in the car's computer system, and investigators were about to use that data to piece together a timeline. And that timeline led them to Santa Barbara County, spring 2025. Middle of the night, David gets in his car and drives to a remote area of Santa Barbara County. Not a populated area. Not a place where you'd go for a casual visit. A remote area. The kind of place where nobody's around to see what you're doing. And David didn't just pass through. He stayed there for hours. Then he drove back. Investigators got this information from tracking data, phone pings, GPS coordinates, the kind of digital footprint that you can't erase no matter how careful you think you're being. And when they looked at the timeline of that trip when it happened, how long David stayed, where exactly he went, they started connecting dots. Because here's what they believe. They believe Celeste Rivas Hernandez died around that same time, springtime 2025, which would explain why her body was in such advanced decomposition when it was found in September. And they believe something happened during that Santa Barbara trip. Something that involved Celeste. Now, we don't know exactly what investigators think happened up there. They haven't said it publicly, haven't filed charges, haven't even officially called this a homicide yet. But people close to the investigation sources who've been briefed on what the LAPD is looking at, they're saying Santa Barbara is key to this case. They're saying whatever happened to Celeste, it started there.
I want to talk about the mystery still in this David investigation. We broke the story yesterday that David is viewed as a suspect in the death of Celeste Rivas. The big mystery centers around something that we have now confirmed absolutely as true, that the LAPD has some tracking information where they claim that David took this mysterious trip to a very remote area of Santa Barbara County in the middle of the night in the spring of 2025. Now that is months before the body was discovered in Los Angeles in a trunk. I don't think it's hard to connect the dots. And he stayed there, by the way, for several hours. So I don't think it's hard to connect the dots that one of the things they seem to be looking at is whether Celeste was killed then and he buried the body there or left the body there in some way. If he did that, then the question would be, why would somebody, whether it would be him or somebody else, remove the body from Santa Barbara County, which is 100 miles away from LA, and bring it to Los Angeles and then put it and leave it in a trunk on a well-traveled street only to be found after the car was abandoned. That's the part that doesn't make sense. And I think that's, at least what I'm hearing, that's something the LAPD is really looking at. But I believe they have a theory. I don't know what it is, but based on our information, they have some theory about if the body was buried in Santa Barbara County or left in Santa Barbara County in some remote area, how it came back to Los Angeles. And that may also explain why we are told the LAPD believes that David would have had help. And now I don't know whether that help would be taking the body from Santa Barbara back to LA. I don't know. But that to me is the logical way of connecting the dots. Now I'm also told that logic is not a big part of this case because a lot of it doesn't make sense just in terms of everything that happened. But based on this Santa Barbara trip, it seems that the LAPD's operative theory is that Celeste was killed in the spring of 2025. The body not discovered until around September of this year.
But here's the other thing investigators are looking at. If Celeste died in the spring and her body was found in September, where was she for all those months in between? Because the body was frozen, which means somebody had access to a freezer, a big freezer, big enough to hold a dismembered body. And investigators think they know where that freezer was. David had been staying at a rental property in the Hollywood Hills. Nice place, expensive, the kind of house that comes with all the amenities, including, according to photos from inside the property, a large KitchenAid refrigerator with a freezer compartment. Now, we have to be clear, this is speculation. The LAPD hasn't confirmed that Celeste's body was stored in that freezer. Haven't said for certain that the freezer in David's rental property was used. But TMZ got access to photos of the inside of that house from a few years back, and they measured the dimensions of that freezer. And they reported that a body, even a dismembered one, could fit inside. A search warrant was executed on that property. LAPD went in, took items, collected evidence. They're not saying what they found, but the fact that they got a warrant and executed it, that tells you they had probable cause. That tells you they believed evidence of a crime was inside that house. And here's where it gets even more complicated. Because if Celeste's body was in that freezer for months, and then it ended up in the Tesla on Bluebird Avenue in September, somebody had to move it. Somebody had to take a frozen, dismembered body out of a freezer, transport it across Los Angeles, and put it in that car. Attorney Mark Geragos went on a podcast and dropped a bomb. He's not connected to this case officially, doesn't represent David, doesn't represent anyone involved. But he's talked to people close to the investigation, and what they told him?
I think what law enforcement is focusing on right now is they're trying to determine locations, and they have reverse engineered. They obviously know when they found the car. They obviously know when they discovered the remains. They now are reverse engineering the movements of all those who were involved, and they've done it in a very sophisticated way.
And investigators don't think David did that alone. There's a second suspect, not just a person of interest, not just someone the LAPD wants to talk to, a suspect, someone who investigators believe was involved before, during, and after Celeste's death. Let that sink in. Before, during, and after. Which means this person wasn't just helping clean up a mess after Celeste died. This person may have been there when it happened, may have helped kill her, may have helped hide the body, may have been part of this from the very beginning. And according to sources, the LAPD has identified who this person is. They know the name, they know the connection to David, they know where this person was during key moments of the timeline, but they're not saying anything publicly. Not yet. Because they're still building the case. So how did investigators identify this second suspect? Technology. The kind of technology that makes it almost impossible to hide in 2025. Cell phone data. Every time your phone pings a tower, that data gets recorded. Every time you make a call, send a text, use an app, all of that leaves a digital trail. And investigators pulled all of that data for David and everyone connected to him. They created a map showing who was where and when. Social media geolocation. You post a photo on Instagram? That photo has metadata, GPS coordinates showing exactly where you were when you took it. You check in somewhere on Facebook? That's logged. You use Snapchat's location feature? That's tracked. And investigators went through all of it. Every post, every story, every tag. Tesla's internal tracking system. This is the big one. Because Teslas don't just track where the car goes. They track when the doors are opened, when the trunk is accessed, when someone uses the key card or the app to unlock the vehicle. All of that data is stored in the car's computer. And the LAPD pulled every single bit of it. And when they put all of that data together, phone pings, social media posts, Tesla logs, they found someone whose movements matched up with David's at critical moments. Someone who was in the same places at the same times. Someone who accessed that Tesla. Someone who may have been the last person to move the car before it was towed. That's the second suspect. And according to Mark Geragos, this person is in investigators' sights right now. But here's the question everybody's asking. If the LAPD knows who this person is, why haven't they made an arrest? Why are David and this second suspect still walking around free? The answer? The medical examiner. When Celeste's body was found on September 8th, it was immediately sent to the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's office, and the ME's initial assessment was apparent homicide. Which makes sense. A 14-year-old girl doesn't end up decapitated and dismembered by accident. But apparent homicide is not the same as confirmed homicide. Because to officially call something a homicide, the medical examiner has to determine the cause and manner of death, and that's where everything hit a wall. The condition of Celeste's body made it nearly impossible to determine how she died. The body had been frozen for months. Freezing does things to human tissue. It breaks down cells. It damages organs. It makes it harder to see injuries that might have happened before death. And when the body thaws, decomposition accelerates. So by the time the ME was doing the autopsy, the body had been frozen, partially thawed, frozen again, thawed again. The tissue was in bad shape. The body had been dismembered. The head was separated from the torso. The limbs were cut off. And when you're cutting through bone and tissue, you're destroying potential evidence. You're making it harder to see things like strangulation marks on the neck, harder to find defensive wounds on the hands, harder to determine if there was blunt force trauma to the head. The body had been wrapped in blankets and covered with life jackets, which means if there were fibers, hairs, DNA from the killer, any of that evidence could have been contaminated or destroyed. And then there's the issue of decomposition. Even with the freezing, the body had been dead for months. Soft tissue breaks down, organs liquefy. Toxicology becomes harder to run because the chemicals in the body change over time. So when the ME tried to determine cause of death, they couldn't find anything definitive. No bullet wounds, no obvious stab wounds, no clear signs of strangulation, no blunt force trauma that stood out. And without a clear cause of death, they couldn't officially call it a homicide. The ME listed the cause of death as deferred pending additional tests, which is code for we need more time to figure this out. Weeks went by. The ME ran toxicology, ran additional tests, consulted with forensic experts, and still, they couldn't come up with a definitive answer. Then, in late November, something changed. The ME's website had been listing Celeste's case with all the standard information: name, age, date of death, cause of death, deferred. But then one day, all of that information disappeared. Every field went blank. The case was still there, but none of the details were visible. Why? Because the LAPD requested a court order to place a security hold on the case, which means the ME is not allowed to release any information to the public. Not the cause of death, not the manner of death, not the toxicology results, nothing. And when a security hold gets placed on a case like this, it usually means one of two things. Either the ME has determined the cause of death and the LAPD doesn't want that information getting out while they're building their case, or the ME has found evidence that connects to a suspect, and releasing that information could compromise the investigation. Either way, it's a sign that things are moving forward, that the LAPD has what they need to make an arrest. They're just waiting for the right moment. Here's the other complication. Even if the ME can't determine a physical cause of death like strangulation or blunt force trauma, there's still toxicology. And toxicology can tell you a lot. Did Celeste have drugs in her system when she died? If so, what kind? Were they recreational drugs that she might have taken herself? Or were they something like GHB, Rohypnol, fentanyl drugs that are commonly used to incapacitate victims? If investigators find drugs in her system that she couldn't have taken voluntarily, that's evidence of foul play. That's evidence that someone drugged her. And if someone drugged her, that's part of a homicide. But here's the problem. Toxicology takes time, especially when the body's been dead for months. The chemicals break down. The concentrations change. It becomes harder to get accurate results. And even if they do find drugs in Celeste's system, proving how those drugs got there is another challenge. Did someone slip them into her drink? Did someone inject her? Did she take them willingly and then something went wrong? All of these questions have to be answered before the LAPD can move forward with charges. Because if they arrest David and this second suspect without solid evidence, a good defense attorney will rip the case apart. And the LAPD knows that, especially with a high-profile case like this. Let's talk about why this case is moving slower than a typical homicide investigation. Because normally, when you find a dismembered body in someone's car, that person gets arrested pretty quickly. You bring them in, you question them, you charge them, you let the courts figure out the rest. But this isn't a normal case. This is a celebrity case, and celebrity cases come with extra scrutiny, extra pressure, extra risk. The LAPD knows the whole world is watching this case. News outlets are reporting on every development. Social media is dissecting every piece of information. True crime channels like this one are breaking down the timeline and the evidence. And if the LAPD makes a mistake, if they arrest someone without enough evidence, if they rush this and it falls apart in court, that's national news. That's a scandal. That's careers getting ruined. So they're moving carefully. They're double-checking everything. They're making sure that when they do make an arrest, they have an airtight case. Because with a high-profile defendant, you only get one shot. You can't afford to mess it up. And then there's the issue of David's legal team. According to reports, David hired Blair Burke, high-powered criminal defense attorney, the kind of lawyer who represents celebrities and gets results. And when you've got a lawyer like that, they're not letting their client talk to police. They're not letting their client make any statements. They're advising complete silence, which is smart. Because anything David says can and will be used against him. So his legal team is sitting back, waiting to see what the LAPD has, waiting to see what evidence they've collected, and then they'll respond. But here's what sources are saying. David hasn't been cooperating with the investigation. The LAPD wanted to interview him after Celeste's body was found. He lawyered up immediately, refused to talk, and legally he has every right to do that. But it's not a good look. If you're innocent, if you had nothing to do with this girl's death, wouldn't you want to help investigators figure out what happened? Wouldn't you want to clear your name? The fact that David immediately went silent, that tells investigators something. Let's go back to the Tesla, because that car is the key to everything. Teslas are basically computers on wheels. They're recording data constantly, and all of that data is stored in the car's system. The LAPD knows this, so they pulled every bit of information they could from that vehicle. Here's what the Tesla can tell investigators. Every location the car traveled to. The GPS system logs every trip, every turn, every stop. So investigators know exactly where that car went in the days, weeks, and months before Celeste's body was discovered. Every time the car was unlocked. Whether it was unlocked using the key card, the phone app, or the key fob, that information is logged. So investigators know who had access to the car and when. Because if someone opened the trunk to put Celeste's body inside, that's logged. The date, the time, the location, all of it, every time the car was charged. Teslas need to be plugged in to charge, and when they're plugged in, they often connect to Wi-Fi or cellular networks, which means investigators can see where the car was charged and when. And here's the kicker. If someone used the Tesla app on their phone to unlock the car or access the trunk, investigators can pull data from that person's phone. They can see what time the app was opened, what commands were sent, where the person was when they did it. All of this data is building a timeline that shows who had access to the car, who moved it, who opened the trunk, and when Celeste's body was placed inside. According to reports, this data is what led investigators to the second suspect, because the logs show someone other than David accessing that car. Someone who may have been the last person to move it before it was towed. Here's another piece of the puzzle. The person who owns the rental property where David was staying, they hired a private investigator. Because when your property gets tied up in a homicide investigation, you want answers. You want to protect yourself. You want to know what the hell happened in your house. That private investigator, Steve Fisher, says he found video footage, surveillance video showing someone driving the Tesla, and he provided that footage to law enforcement. Now, we don't know who was driving the car in that video. Fisher hasn't said publicly, but the fact that he felt it was important enough to give to the LAPD, that tells you it's relevant. That tells you whoever was driving that car is someone investigators need to look at, and this is where the second suspect comes back into play. Because if the video shows someone other than David driving the Tesla around the time Celeste's body was moved, that's evidence. That's proof that someone else was involved. Here's something else that's complicating this case. The relationship between the LAPD and the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office is reportedly not great right now. According to sources, the LAPD is frustrated because normally, in a high-profile case like this, the ME's office will prioritize the autopsy and toxicology. They'll fast-track the results so investigators can move forward. But in this case, it's been over 2.5 months since Celeste's body was found. And the LAPD still doesn't have an official cause of death. Still doesn't have complete toxicology results. 2.5 months isn't unusual for a run-of-the-mill homicide. But this isn't run-of-the-mill. This is a 14-year-old girl found dismembered in a celebrity's car. This is national news. This is the kind of case that should be getting priority. So why the delay? Nobody's saying for sure. But sources close to the investigation are suggesting that the ME's office isn't being as cooperative as the LAPD would like, that there's tension between the two agencies, and that tension is slowing everything down. But despite all of that, despite the delays and the complications and the frustrations, the investigation is moving forward. The LAPD has named David as a suspect. They've identified a second suspect, They've collected evidence from the Tesla, from the rental property, from phones and social media. They've built a timeline, and now they're just waiting for the final pieces to fall into place. When Celeste's body was discovered on September 8th, David was on tour, performing in front of crowds, living his life miles away from Los Angeles, while a 14-year-old girl's dismembered body was decomposing in his car. And when news broke that the body had been found, that the car was registered to him, that the LAPD wanted to talk to him, David made a choice. He canceled the rest of his tour dates, just stopped, pulled the plug on everything. Now, his representatives put out a statement, said he was cooperating fully with law enforcement, said he wanted to help in any way he could, said he was devastated by what happened. But here's the thing, those statements, they don't match up with what sources close to the investigation are saying. Because according to those sources, David hasn't cooperated at all, hasn't sat down for an interview with the LAPD, hasn't answered questions, hasn't provided his side of the story. He hired Blair Burke immediately, high-powered criminal defense attorney. And from that moment on, radio silence, which, again, is his legal right. You don't have to talk to the police. You don't have to answer questions. You don't have to explain yourself. And any good defense attorney will tell you to keep your mouth shut until they've seen what evidence the prosecution has. But it creates a problem, because when you're the last known person to have contact with a victim, when the victim's body is found in your car, when you refuse to explain any of it, people start filling in the blanks themselves. And the blanks they're filling in, they don't look good for David. Former LAPD detectives who've spoken about this case publicly are saying David is likely under surveillance right now, which means plainclothes officers are watching his movements, tracking where he goes, who he talks to, what he does. Why? Because sometimes suspects slip up. They go back to the crime scene. They try to contact witnesses. They do something that gives investigators more evidence. And if David is under surveillance, the LAPD is hoping he'll make a mistake. But there's another reason for surveillance. If the LAPD believes David is a danger to others, if they think he might try to flee, if they think he might destroy evidence, surveillance allows them to keep tabs on him without arresting him. Because once you arrest someone, the clock starts ticking. You have to charge them within a certain time frame. You have to present evidence. And if you're not ready to do that, it's better to just watch and wait. So David might think he's free, might think he's going about his life, but there's a good chance every move he makes is being documented by law enforcement. Here's the big legal question. If the medical examiner comes back and says, cause of death, undetermined, can the LAPD still arrest David and the second suspect? The answer is yes, absolutely. Because even if they can't prove exactly how Celeste died, they can prove other things. They can prove concealment of a body. They can prove desecration of human remains. They can prove that someone dismembered a 14-year-old girl and hid her in a car for months. And here's the other thing. If toxicology shows that Celeste had drugs in her system, drugs that she couldn't have taken voluntarily, that's evidence of foul play. That's evidence that someone drugged her. And drugging a minor, that's a crime. Even if they can't prove that the drugs killed her, they can charge whoever drugged her with felony counts. And then there's the circumstantial evidence, the Santa Barbara trip, the frozen body, the dismemberment, the Tesla data showing who accessed the car, the phone records, the social media posts. All of that builds a case even without a definitive cause of death. Legal analyst Allison Triessel, who's been following this case, said something important. She said the LAPD doesn't want to rush this because there's no statute of limitations on murder, which means even if it takes 6 months, a year, 2 years to build the perfect case, they can wait. They don't have a time crunch. And in a case this high profile, with this much media attention, with a celebrity defendant who can afford the best lawyers money can buy, The LAPD wants to make sure they get it right the first time. Because if they charge David and it falls apart in court, that's not just an embarrassment, that's the end of the case. You can't charge someone twice for the same crime.
This is a high-profile case with a lot of eyes on the LAPD, and they don't want to get it wrong. They should not have to be in any type of a rush because there's no statute of limitations on a murder case, if this is in fact a murder, and the coroner has yet to release the manner of death or the toxicology reports.
Celeste Rivas Hernandez's family has been destroyed by this. A 14-year-old girl, their daughter, their sister, their niece, gone. And not just gone murdered, dismembered, hidden in a car for months like she was garbage. The family hasn't said much publicly. They've stayed mostly quiet, letting investigators do their work. But the pain is there. You can see it in the few statements they've released. The grief, the anger, and it's not just the family. The community in Lake Elsinore, where Celeste grew up, has been following this case closely. People are demanding answers, demanding justice, demanding that whoever did this to Celeste gets held accountable. Social media has been ruthless. People have been calling for David's arrest, calling him a monster, calling him a predator. And while we have to be careful about jumping to conclusions before charges are filed, the court of public opinion has already made up its mind. In their eyes, David is guilty. The only question is when he's going to be arrested. And then there's the broader conversation this case has sparked about the grooming of minors, about power dynamics between celebrities and young fans, about how easy it is for someone with money and influence to manipulate vulnerable kids. Because even if the LAPD hasn't confirmed the nature of David's relationship with Celeste, the reports are out there. The alleged images and videos, the whispers that she was spending time at his house. And people are asking the obvious question: what was a grown man doing with a 14-year-old girl? If those reports are true, if David was in any kind of relationship with Celeste, that's not just morally wrong. That's illegal. That's statutory rape. That's exploitation of a minor. And people want him held accountable for that too. So where does this case go from here? Based on everything we know, here's what's likely to happen. The medical examiner will eventually release their final report. Whether they determine a cause of death or list it as undetermined, that report will go to the LAPD. And the LAPD will use that report, combined with all the other evidence they've collected, to decide what charges to file. If the ME determines Celeste was murdered, if they find evidence of strangulation or blunt force trauma or lethal levels of drugs in her system, the LAPD will file murder charges. Probably first-degree murder, given the evidence of premeditation and the dismemberment of the body. If the ME can't determine a cause of death, the LAPD will likely file charges related to concealment of a body, desecration of human remains, and possibly lesser charges related to drugging a minor or unlawful imprisonment. Either way, arrests are coming. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And when those arrests happen, expect a media frenzy. This case has already gotten national attention. But once charges are filed, once David is arrested, once we see him in handcuffs, it's going to explode. Every news outlet in the country will be covering it. Every true crime channel will be breaking it down. It's going to be everywhere. And then comes the trial, which, given David's legal team, is going to be a battle. Blair Burke doesn't lose cases easily. She's going to fight every piece of evidence, challenge every witness, try to poke holes in the prosecution's timeline, and the prosecution is going to have to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that David and this second suspect killed Celeste Rivas Hernandez. It's going to be ugly, it's going to be long, and it's going to be painful for Celeste's family to sit through. But if the LAPD has done their job right, if they've built the case carefully and thoroughly, if all that evidence, the Tesla data, the phone records, the Santa Barbara trip, the frozen body. If all of it holds up in court, then David and whoever helped him are going to prison for a very long time. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 14 years old when she died. 14. She should be in high school right now, worrying about finals and prom and college applications, hanging out with friends, living her life, making mistakes, learning, growing, becoming who she was meant to be. Instead, she's gone, taken by someone who saw her as disposable, someone who killed her, cut her up, froze her body, and left her in a car like she didn't matter. But Celeste did matter. She mattered to her family. She mattered to her friends. She mattered to her community. And now, her story matters to everyone who's following this case. Everyone who's demanding justice. Everyone who's saying, not one more girl. Because Celeste's case is a reminder that predators come in all forms. They're not always strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes they're people with money, people with influence, people who use their power to manipulate and control and destroy. And if David is convicted, if he's held accountable for what happened to Celeste, maybe, just maybe, it'll send a message that nobody is above the law, that money can't buy your way out of murder. That justice will come for you, eventually. Celeste deserved better. She deserved to live. She deserved to grow up. She deserved to be more than a true crime story on YouTube. But since we can't give her that, the least we can do is make sure her name isn't forgotten. Make sure people know what happened to her. Make sure whoever did this pays for it. Rest in peace, Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Your story isn't over yet. And when justice comes, and it will come, your name will be the one people remember, not his. If this case made you angry, good. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 14 years old. She deserved justice. If you want to follow cases where we break down what really happened, not just the headlines, but the evidence, the timeline, the truth, subscribe to Behind Dark Crime. Drop a comment. What do you think happened during that Santa Barbara trip? And if you know someone who's being groomed or manipulated by an older person, say something. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children hotline is 1-800-THELOST. This is Behind Dark Crime. I'll see you in the next one.